If you can tell good stories, growing online becomes incredibly easy, but learning how to become a good storyteller is really confusing for a lot of people. So today we're going to give you 5 really simple tips that if you implement today, you will instantly start telling better stories and your content will become more captivating. People are going to care, they're going to share, and they're going to engage with it because everybody loves a good story. So let's help you become a great storyteller. So most of these tips are from an interview on storytelling featuring Sean Puri from My First Million. He is a storytelling expert. He has studied the best storytellers in the world, and he did such a good job giving simple to follow formulas and specific tips to actually tell better stories. And the first one is incredibly simple. The foundation for any good story is simply this: intention and obstacle. For a story to be compelling, at any given moment, you should be able to pause it and it be very clear what the intention is of the character and what's the obstacle, what's standing in their way, what are the repercussions or what are the penalties if they don't get it. Intention, obstacle. And this is the first time that I've heard this tip, but if you go do this with any of your favorite movies or TV shows, it is completely true. At any given moment, you can tell what the intention is and the obstacle. It makes it easy to follow and also highly compelling.
If you read any story or you watch any movie, you should be able to pause the screen and just say, what do they want right now? And what's in their way? And if you ever go like 5 minutes without that being clear, people will lose their attention will drift away. And what I realized was that it is the fundamental building block of storytelling.
So when you're telling stories in your life and in your content, you want to make sure it's constantly obvious the intention and the obstacle of the hero of that story, whether it's you or the person watching. The next tip is to set stakes. Many people think that to tell a good story, it has to be something extreme or life or death stakes. And that's not true at all. Sean actually stresses the complete opposite. If you get good at telling stories, you can build more interest, more likability, and more connection with people through telling stories that aren't that high stakes, that aren't life or death. And the example that he gave was simply making dinner for his mom since he had moved out on his own, and he hadn't done that yet because he was nervous about how he was going to make her dinner. So how you make something simple like that interesting still is by setting stakes. And you do that by creating a real feeling of emotion for the people that are watching it. So basically, you had to believe that Sean is genuinely worried about this during the story, and that the feeling of embarrassment that he may get from not doing a good job when making his mom dinner is a real emotion that he was going to feel, and the audience can feel that it's genuine. As long as they can feel the potential for the emotion and it being something the hero doesn't want, those are stakes that are enough for people to care. And that really opens up the opportunities to tell stories, because when you can do this and you focus on the emotional side of it, you can turn any simple thing into an amazing story by setting stakes.
And so I'm telling the story about how my mom comes over and I decide to cook Brussels sprouts, the most adult food there is. Problem is, don't know how to cook Brussels sprouts, so I'm doing it, blah, blah, blah. And I tell the story of cooking the Brussels sprouts, and I kid you not, everybody's entertained, they listen to it.
This next tip is one that I actually have written on a sticky note on my desk and on my computer to constantly remind me whenever I'm writing, and it's taken from the founders of South Park. They shared this tip when they went into a university class on storytelling. It is so simple, but it is so effective, and amazing stories can be told simply by understanding this. Whenever you're writing a story, in between sections of the story, you should only ever be able to put "but." So this happened, but this happened, a change of direction, or this happened, therefore this happened. So the rule is but and therefore, never and then. So if you're telling a story, the easiest example that comes to mind is when a kid tells a story. It's always, I did this, and then did this, and then did this, and then did this. And what happens when people do that? You roll over and you stop paying attention. But if you swap the and then and you make sure that a but or therefore fits in between the pieces of the story, it instantly becomes way more compelling. This is a super simple formula that is also applicable to anything that you ever watch. If it is good, you will be able to put a but or a therefore in between sections of the story. It makes it compelling, it creates stakes, and it also makes it very easy to follow, much like the first tip. So I recommend having it on a sticky note, but and therefore, never and then. That alone will make your stories so much better.
So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No. It should be this happens, and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens.
Like Trey said, it's those two, but, because, therefore, that gives you the causation between each beat, and that makes that that's a story.
The next tip from Sean was one that I really, really liked because of where things are with social media today. The word hook, or hooks in general, is so overblown, and it's a word that is overused all the time because we live in algorithm worlds where people are scrolling, so you have to hook them to capture their attention. And so everyone beats on that word and they beat on the skill of creating a good hook. But what Sean said is he prefers to focus on frames of concepts rather than hooks.
So I think that more important than a hook, which is just like a grab you by the throat attention grabber, is think about how you're going to frame your ideas.
And so what's the difference between a frame and a hook? A hook is the words that you say, but the frame is the bigger idea. It's more of the packaging of the idea. How are you structuring the elements that make this a compelling story? So more of the why, not the what. And he gave an example to make this easy to understand. An example of bad framing would look like this. Here's what public speaking expert X did at the beginning of his presentation. So there's the bad. I'll now give you the good and explain the difference. A good frame would look a lot more like this. Here is what you can learn about public speaking from one of the best public speakers in the world. So that's an example of a bad frame versus a good frame. At the end of the day, the content and the subject matter is going to be the exact same, but the frame is far more compelling. And you get to that when thinking about the bigger picture of how you're going to structure the story that you're telling, rather than just focusing on the first 10 seconds of it. So that's the difference between a hook and a frame. And that is an example of a good frame versus a bad frame.
Frames are about the idea and how you're going to make that idea relevant and how you're going to connect two ideas that seem unrelated to be related.
And as a creator myself who has worked with brands, creators, and been creating content for years at this point, I can't stress how important that stuff actually is. And when you think in terms of frames rather than just hooks, you can go a lot deeper and think about the viewer experience. And that level of effort beforehand brings so much in terms of results. When people see it on the other side, they can feel effort. And so when you put effort into a frame, you're thinking about the whole experience that someone has when they're consuming that content. You're thinking about the way to make it most compelling. You're thinking about them. You're speaking their language, and you're making it as interesting as possible throughout. And this effort beforehand gets rewarded. When you see people that consistently go viral because they think of this stuff beforehand. That's one of the biggest differences between creators that break through and those that struggle or constantly sit at a few hundred views on something like TikTok. It's because they don't put the effort into things beforehand like frames. And it makes so much of the difference. You can film content until you're blue in the face, but it's the 1% of additional effort that goes into this thought before you even start recording or writing that makes 100% of the difference. Because when so many people are blurring together and they're just spamming out content, this little bit of extra effort and thought makes you stand out like crazy, which leads to higher watch time, more engagement, and more shares. So you win. Effort is always rewarded, and strategic effort is even more so. So framing and understanding what that looks like is really crucial. And if you want to get really good at this, Sean gave another perfect example from a real world situation that he had personally. Someone else had made a post and was the perfect person to make that post given their previous experience. So their post should have gone viral, but because they didn't frame it in a great and compelling way, theirs didn't. Sean took the exact same concept, focused more on framing, and it went extremely viral on Twitter. But Sean will do a better job of explaining it than I did, so here he is.
The other one was written by this guy, Chris, who created an app that was kind of like Clubhouse, went super viral. It was called Secret back in the day. I don't know if you remember this. It's called Secret, went super viral. They raised like $100 million. The founder sold some secondary, bought a Ferrari. It was like the hit product for like a very short window of time, and then it died. So if anyone has the credibility to say why Clubhouse might fail, that guy was actually the guy. The problem was he was extremely dry, told no story, and used very 12th grade reading level jargon, like Clubhouse's existential threat, the time to value ratio, it immediately felt like homework. My thing was, everybody thinks X, but I think Y, and the most important part was, here's how I think it's gonna go down, not here's why I'm right. So here's how it's gonna go down is basically like gossip, it's story. Here's why is logic and rationale. And then the rest of the thread, the reason this thread got like 20 million people to read it was because I wrote almost like a screenplay. This is not how most business tech Twitter writing goes. Most business tech Twitter writing goes is it's an intelligence contest. and I was telling a story. And so, that's why I think it worked.
So that is a prime example about how little differences make such a major impact in terms of grabbing attention, building emotion, and keeping attention. Can't stress that enough. If you haven't hit your goals online, the effort that you put into learning and then implementing that before you even create makes a world of a difference. If you create content online, and especially if you have a podcast, this channel is for you. We post weekly free videos just like this to help you get better at telling stories, better at creating content, and building an audience online that you can monetize. And we specifically focus on helping podcasters because growing a podcast is incredibly difficult. And you know that if you're a podcaster. But if you want the best information sent directly to your inbox before anyone else, make sure to subscribe to our free weekly newsletter. You can do so using the link down below, and all the information we're covering here was already sent to our subscribers weeks ago. So if you want to be the first to get this information, make sure you subscribe. And the last tip is actually one directly from me, and that is to study the tape. We're at a point now where every social media platform gives you very specific watch time analytics. So you can actually see how people are responding to the stories that you're telling. So every time you go and study and implement a storytelling tip and try to get better at storytelling, see how it performs. YouTube is probably the best at this. You can see where people drop off. So what you want to do is study your retention charts, see the things you're doing that lead to people liking something more, potentially rewatching it. You'll see a spike up. Or if you see a lot of people drop off very quickly, study that as well. You'll find some pretty crazy things that you do without even thinking about it that causes people to leave. And so if you spot these, you can make sure to not do them in future videos or stories that you tell, and that'll keep people around longer. Massive pro tip here for YouTube specifically. You want to get amazing at compelling people and getting them into your story to keep them around for at least a minute and a half, 2 minutes. They're going to stick around for the entire video because once you get them to that point, sunk cost sets in and they are invested. They're going to stick around for almost the entire video. So if you want your videos to pop off, obsess over the first 2 minutes. And if you put the effort into framing the concept in a very good way, like Sean suggests, that becomes a lot easier. And studying the tape makes it very easy to get better. You want to get reps in, you need to implement these tips and see them in action. And the fastest way to get real-time feedback is just seeing how people are viewing this. How are they liking it? People give their time to things that keep them hooked. And so if you haven't captured their attention, they're going to leave. And the best stories keep people's attention. So as you try different things, see how they actually work in the real world. Keep the things that work, eliminate the things that don't. Becoming a great storyteller is wildly important, but as a podcaster, if you have guests on, pulling great stories out of them is equally, if not more important. And the best podcasters in the world have mastered the art of conversation to do this with every single episode. And we recently broke down some of the best podcasters and the strategies that they use to pull out great content from people in this video right here. So if you want to master conversation and make for great content anytime you're speaking with someone, check out this video right here. I'll see you over there.